Your Excellency, President of the Human Rights Council, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, fellow mandate holders, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to address the Human Rights Council in my capacity as chair of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, and I wish to thank the Human Rights Council for once again allowing me to report on our activities for the working group in 2023-2024, including the findings, conclusions, and recommendations of our 2024 thematic report, Fulfilling the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of People of African Descent in the Age of Digitalization, Artificial Intelligence, and New and Emerging Technologies. You may wish to consult our reports in detail in the HRC5770 and HRC5770. Since our report presented last year, the working group has been engaged in several activities as outlined in the report. In particular, the working group held its 33rd and 34th sessions, both private sessions, respectively, in Addis Ababa from 4 to 8 December and in Geneva from 22 to 26 April 2024. As funding has been constrained in 2024, the working group has only been able to conduct one country visit to Colombia in late May 2024 and regrettably could not conduct the technical visits. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the thematic report on digitalization and AI is based on a desk review of recent research and reports, written responses to the working group's call for submissions from states and civil society, and various consultations, including a virtual consultation on the 23rd of July 2024 with experts specialized in these areas. The impact of digitalization and artificial intelligence on the economic, social, and cultural sectors is becoming rapidly evident, raising substantial questions and concerns about human rights and ethics, as the use, misuse, and abuse of these technologies can inadvertently or intentionally introduce, perpetuate, and exacerbate biases and discrimination in virtually all sectors, communities, and societies. Digitalization and AI have a multiplier effect, speeding up and extending their scope and reach with each successive iteration in their design and deployment, whether for good or for ill. While digitalization and AI are inherently neutral and objective, they are designed, developed, and deployed by human beings who can consciously or unconsciously integrate their biases and prejudices into digital technologies, which in turn automate and augment these. They also offer unprecedented opportunities to protect and promote human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Large-scale AI systems are developed almost exclusively in a small number of companies and elite university laboratories, which rarely engage people of African descent. AI systems are trained on enormous quantities of data, mostly on non-Black populations, which are used to build models of behavior. The designers and developers of machine learning and AI systems can therefore intentionally or unintentionally introduce biases into their algorithms through the utilization of pre-built models which contain racial biases, as evident in some generative AI systems being unable to create accurate and realistic depictions of Black people. How developers obtain such critical data raises ethical issues, as acquisition practices often lack transparency, with instances where data have been obtained without proper consent or through exploitative means. Facial recognition software used by governments and the police disproportionately affect people of African descent, as they propagate biased associations about race groups, exacerbating racial inequality. In 2015, for example, Google had to apologize after its image recognition app mistakenly labeled African Americans as gorillas. The enduring surveillance practices from times of enslavement and colonization have been made worse with the use of AI, as research has consistently shown greater inaccuracies among non-white populations, and the accounts of the disproportionate levels of harm from face recognition software experienced by people of African descent are well known. In health, housing, employment, and education, data used as evidence to train AI models have been prejudiced against people of African descent by disproportionately reflecting specific demographics and by having certain assumptions or stereotypes about different groups embedded in the data. Based on its findings, the working group concluded that people can unconsciously retain biases garnered from AI. Retaining and deploying these biases in decision-making that result in biased judgments and discriminatory outcomes if left unchecked. Thus, the fundamental solution is to ensure that from the inception, at the lowest rung of any digitalization and/or AI, that there is a conscious effort to act for benefit and not harm, recognizing that once human agency is involved, there is going to be bias. To this end, the working group made 15 recommendations in our report. Key among these are that states must raise general awareness about digitalization and artificial intelligence, ensuring a basic level of digital literacy in at least 60 to 80% of its population, pegged to the current global literacy rate. States must institutionalize legislative and policy frameworks informed by ethical principles and commitments to fairness, equality, and equity to regulate the use of digitalization and AI, generative AI, and the next generation of technologies, putting in place effective sanctions for non-compliance and mitigating and compensatory initiatives for any harm caused by non-compliant entities. States must support a recognition of the impact of race, racial bias, and racial discrimination in digitalization and the use, misuse, and abuse of AI through research regarding people of African descent. And finally, states must ensure that digitalization and the use of AI continue to be regulated, moderated, facilitated, and remain subject to human oversight. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I now turn my attention to the fact-finding visit to Norway at the invitation of the government of Norway. I wish to express the appreciation of the working group to the government of Norway for their welcome and receptivity to the visit, as well as facilitating the several meetings and travel within Norway. And they also fed us, so thank you very much, Norway. The working group met with government officials, civil society organizations, and people of African descent in Oslo, Kristiansand, Bergen, and Trondheim. I would like to highlight the main findings of the visit. Norway has in place the requisite legislation, legal, and policy frameworks for migrants to be considered for entry into Norway and to remain in Norway. The working group noted and documented a number of positive measures that the government of Norway has institutionalized to facilitate and support migrants to Norway, spanning education and orientation about the culture, norms and legal provisions, the orientation of employers, basic training for employment, and the provision of basic housing and translation interpretation support, among others. The working group welcomes the government's action plan on racism and discrimination for 2024-2027, in which it envisages, by targeting the labor market, youth, and local communities, reducing inequalities and increasing social mobility through redistribution efforts, increasing labor market participation, including by integrating as many immigrants as possible into the labor market and enhancing participation in education. That vision to combat racism and discrimination is a continuation of the government's action plan against racism and discrimination on the grounds of ethnicity and religion for 2020-2023. The working group noted that repeatedly, in every city and at every engagement with people of African descent, 3 issues came up. The overriding concern was the perceived risk or threat of separation of children from their families because parents' customs and practices do not cohere with Norwegian customs and practices. The concerns shared were over infractions as diverse as the way food is prepared, to the volume of speech and the manner of gesticulation, to the management of children's everyday lives. A second concern that was repeated was that regardless of time spent in Norway, even for Norwegian-born children of African descent, including biracial children, that children, many now having achieved the age of majority, continue to be considered as foreigners or migrants. One young man, born in Norway, told of his disassociation with the country of his birth, though he had never visited his parents' homeland nor spoke their language, but who related that he was never accepted as Norwegian because of his dark skin. A third concern that was widely raised is the difficulty, particularly for men of African descent, to secure decent work, particularly work on par with their qualifications, skills, and experience, because they cannot speak Norwegian with a proper Norwegian accent. They are therefore confined to relatively low-paying, low-status employment for life. While many expressed that they had learned to adapt to Norwegian culture, such as skiing and other winter sports, or riding into the hills, many found that there were few pathways to acceptance and integration, and for some, these were well outside of their physical or financial ability. The underrepresentation of Africans and people of African descent and their views and concerns in politics, administration, and public life is a pressing topic that requires attention. The working group concluded that people of African descent who are stereotypically referred to as immigrants in Norway are alienated in practice with little sense of belonging. There is pronounced hierarchy and divide between Norwegians and immigrants in Norwegian society, and its construct, philosophy, and discourse that affects the participation of people of African descent in public affairs and their negotiating power in private life. A man of African descent expressed resignation to his fate in the following terms: "We knew 20 years ago that we had to struggle every day." The working group made several recommendations on specific concerns focused on the need for more robust gathering of data, sufficiently disaggregated by race to be able to better identify and define the situation facing people of African descent in Norway, regardless of their status, and to put in place structure and procedures that would simplify and accelerate the resolution of complaints. The need for special measures to address the disproportionate impact of negative policing and immigration policy implementation on people of African descent. The need to enhance education and training for employability and access to employment at all levels, and most importantly, the need to review and revise the intent, purpose, and implementation of policies and procedures that risk the separation of children from their parents for cultural practices not inimical to the well-being of the child. Mr. President, I wish to reiterate my appreciation to you and the Council for this opportunity to report to you and the working group's readiness to respond to any queries as we continue to build on 22 years of implementation of this mandate. I thank you.